Hi there. So it's a while since I've done one of these videos. This is a small little mini project that I worked on as I'm currently in between jobs. So I put this together in a weekend, sort of on and off, not straight by any means. So one of the things that I saw that come up quite a lot when working with the 2D version of Unity, just for reference, this is Unity version 5.0.1. Just in case anything's changed in later versions of Unity that no longer makes this work. It was working now. So one of the things that I found was a common issue was that the sorting layer and sorting order is very important in 2D because technically there is no Z when you're dealing with 2D. You just have X and Y. So the way you're supposed to use something is through, basically with sprites, is to use their sorting order and sorting layer. So as an example, this grey background has a sorting layer and ordering layer, which determines, what the camera sees, what gets drawn first, and what gets drawn on top of other things. So one of the things I found when you have your project set up like this, where you've got sort of a parent game object, which is your scene, and then you've got different setups, so for midground, for background. Basically, when you have a complex scene, sometimes it's annoying to have to individually go and click on all the different sprites and to change their sorting order if you want to change something just a little bit. And sometimes you can forget which order they're on, and it can get a little bit cumbersome. So I thought I'd write a helper script along with a custom editor script. It's the first time I've ever done any custom editor stuff, which basically helps with that. So how it works is I've got this sorting options manager, which is just a game object. I haven't prefabbed it or anything. It's just something to put my script on. And what it does is it basically goes through the scene, grabs all the different sprite renderers, and then displays them to you. And so then you have access to all of them in one place. So you can sort of see what's on what order, on what layer. And the other good thing is it grabs all of the layers that you've got, that you've set up in your tags. Not your tags, your project settings, your tags, tags and layers. So basically all the sorting layers here, it basically grabs all of them and displays them to you, so you know sort of what different layers you have to work with, and also the order and layer on that. There's an update button because rather than run this, because it's executing in edit mode and it's an editor script, so rather than run this all the time trying to grab all the sprites, which is quite a sort of a lengthy process, it's not efficient to do it all the time. So basically, if you add a new object into the scene which has a sprite renderer, you just need to click update to make sure you're in the latest version. If you delete one that's already existing, that automatically does it for you, automatically checks if a sprite that it had previously is no longer existing. If it's null, it then deletes it from the script, from the scene actually. So I'll just show you the script. It's very basic. It's just two scripts. So one of them is changing the sorting options. Basically all this does is have an array of sprite renderers and a number, which is just going to be the length for the amount of renderers, which is used in the editor script. These are public, and the reason they're public is because I need to access them from the editor script, but because I'm doing a custom editor script, they don't actually display in the inspector. As you can see, there's no displays of those, which is nice because we don't necessarily want them to be displayed. So then we've got a function which is get sprite renderers, which is essentially going through the scene and using resources.find objects of type all and passing in that we want sprite renderers and casting them to a sprite renderer array, which we've defined at the top, and then getting the length. There is an object.find objects of type, but that doesn't work for inactive game objects, and I thought it would be quite nice that even if you have a game object disabled, to be able to access what sorting layer it's on and stuff like that. So you could use object.find objects of type if you only want it to work for the ones that are active in the scene, but I felt sometimes you still want to change stuff, and in the editor things might be inactive, and then once you go into play mode they become active, so you still want to be able to access them. But as I said, this isn't necessarily the nicest function call, or it's quite resource intensive because it's essentially going through all the objects and getting the sprite renderer. There may be better ways to do this, but this is the sort of the quick and easy way I found, and I call this from start. So basically when the start gets called in the inspector. And the reason why I put this into a function is because this will get called by the update button that you saw on the script. So basically you can choose how often you want to update by clicking the button. So with the editor script, it's fairly simple. It looks like a lot, but it's fairly simple. One of the things I do is I have a string array of sorting layer names, which I use for the drop-down box. Also, you can't just get the string value from a drop-down box. You have to get the index as an int. So I also have that. And then scroll position is something that's just used where if you have more objects in the scene there's more objects in the scene that can be held in however much space you've given the inspector. It's like a simple scroll, but I'll show you that in a bit. So you call this on inspector GUI, which is basically every time the inspector updates. This is the code that's called. So it's sort of like the update function for the GUI. So basically, the first thing I do is create this button, this update button. First thing I do is you have to say what your target is. And my target is the change sorting options script. That's why I'm saying it's a custom editor of this script, and I'm saying grab that as my target just so it knows that this script is what it's referring to. And then I have this function called get sorting layer names. What this is a function that I copied from one of the Unity answers page, which is a way of grabbing all the sorting layers that you have from the tags and layers thing within Unity. It does some internal stuff. I'm not necessarily sure how this works. There wasn't really a description of how it works. It was just, here, use this, it works. So I sort of took that on face value. Again, there might be better ways to do this, but this works. It worked for me and it didn't give me any problems, so I stuck with it. So I have the update button then, which basically says when you click the button, do the get sprite renderers, which is again this function which goes through the scene and gets all the sprite renderers, which is useful, which means you can do that how often you want. It won't be happening every update of the GUI of the inspector GUI, so it saves space and time, especially if you have a lot of sprite renderers. That could be a lengthy process. So I've got some spacing. One of the things that I found was a bit annoying was space. You can't define an amount. It's just space is just the default thing, and if you want more, you have to do more of them. Or I guess you could do a GUI style, but I sort of kept away from that kind of stuff because I just wanted something that was basic, fills the purpose, isn't fancy or anything. And then I begin the scroll view, and you just pass in its position, and then you update its position. So that's basically how you do basic scrolling, which I'll show you. And then I end the scroll view later on, so it's all sort of encapsulated in the scrolling. So basically, the main meat of the script is it goes through for every renderer that we grabbed from the other script, as long as it's not null. So this is a check to make sure that it hasn't been deleted. So in the case that it was in the scene, a sprite renderer was in the scene, but then you deleted it, this is to make sure that we no longer try and use non-existing sprite renderers, because that gives you a null pointer exception. So we have a label field where I pretty much just grab the name of the object that the sprite renderer comes from. So in this case, robot boy, grey background, platform, and pink background. I make that with an editor style of bold, so you can see it's a little more easy to see. And then basically I have to go through my string array of sorting layer names. Well, this I didn't necessarily have to. This is the way that I did it. I go through my array of strings, which is my sorting layer names, and I check if the sorting layer name that I've currently selected on the sprite renderer is equal to it. Then that's the index that I'm using. This because again you're forced to use indexes when dealing with this editor GUI layout.popup. It doesn't return you the string value of what you've selected. It returns you the index of what you've selected. And this was the quickest way that I found of making sure that the two match essentially. So then I have this index which grabs which one from the pop-up I've done. So the pop-up is essentially this drop-down box. I don't know why it's called pop-up necessarily, like checkbox, not checkbox, but I would have thought it would be named something different. But anyway, so then I basically say the sprite renderer equals the sorting layer name from the array based on the index again. So it's going through that sort of array of strings which are relevant to the layers, the different layers we have and what they're called, and then it basically pulls that out. So you're basically setting the sorting layer name, which is a string, and then similarly I've got a sorting order, which is the integer, and basically that's very simple to set up. It's just an integer field, which is basically just these ints, which is probably the most simple field you get when dealing with the Unity editor. I'm trying to think why I have order in layer. Oh, order in layer is the actual label that goes along with the field. That's why that's there. And then another space just to space things out again. And then that's it really. So to see it working in action, again, I have all of these objects in various different positions within my hierarchy, but essentially to keep it clean, you can just have that not a drop down, and then you can just go through here and you can start changing stuff around, and it happens because I've got execute in edit mode. It happens as you see it in the editor. So basically I can say this grey background is now going to become the foreground. So now you see that everything else has gone behind it apart from the robot boy, which is also in the foreground. I think when they're both on 0, it just sort of, I think it might just randomly pick which one to put in front. I'm not entirely sure. But if I want to make sure the robot boy is definitely going to be in front, I'd set that to a higher value. And if I want to make sure this one's definitely in front, I set that to a higher value. And you can see it's changed within the scene itself. But I'm going to revert those changes because I had it set up the way I wanted to have it set up. So let's put that back in the background. And back to 0, so then you can see everything else above it. This also works when you're playing in play mode, so I can change the levels of stuff. So now I've sent him to the background so you can't see him anymore, bring him back to the foreground. So it works in play mode. And then the other thing, if I start duplicating some of these objects, so now I've got some more objects here. Again, it hasn't automatically done it because you had to hit the update button. You hit the update button and then we see this sort of scrolling effect. So now we have all of these options. So if you have, you know, hundreds of sprite renderers in the scene, it would just be a big long scroll list. So yeah, it's fairly basic. It sort of does what it says on the tin. It just displays to you all of the sorting layer information from the renderer. It doesn't include the sorting layer ID, which is an index, because it's not like the sorting layer ID isn't like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. They have very specific IDs with them, and it's not user intuitive. So I think it's just better to deal with the actual sort of string representations, because that's that's what you use in the default sprite renderer when you go in. It gives you that, and then so pretty much I just tried to extract sorting layer and ordering layer into a place where you could see all of them together, which I think could be quite useful. How I could expand on this, probably have some type of search ability, if you know the name of the object you want, or maybe have a way of grouping them into the different layers, so you have all the background layers and then all the midground and then all the foreground, or some way of just alphabetically ordering them. If I delved more into the sort of the custom editor stuff than the GUI style stuff, I could probably make it look a lot prettier, but it serves its purpose as is, and I think was a pretty decent foray into learning this kind of stuff, because I actually quite enjoy writing helper scripts and stuff like that. And this actually, the main script turned out to be the editor script as opposed to the actual script that's getting the sprite renderers, but still the same. I think it's still quite helpful, and it was quite fun to do. So there's probably better ways to do things. If anyone happens to know a better way to do this thing and just happens to stumble across this video, feel free to leave a comment below and let me know what things can be changed and what things could be made better. But beyond that, I think I've showed off everything I want to show off. Yeah, I think it's fine. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you guys another fucking year down the line, or whenever my next video is that comes out on this channel. See ya.